Well, it's always hard to know what it is that appeals about a certain subject. It can be just that character is someone that fascinates you because they're so ambiguous, which is the case of JOHN GALLIANO film I'm showing here. I'm just interested to understand him and know about him. But sometimes it can just be the politics. I'm making a film at the moment in Ukraine about the war for Kiev, and I'm filming with the mayor of the city. So this is something I wanted to make something about the politics of that moment. Sometimes it's a childhood story. So I made a film about a book that I loved as a child called The Eagle of the Ninth, which is about a Roman legion going into Scotland in the 2nd century. And so this was just something that was my fantasy dream to make. So I don't know if there's anything that connects all these things together. There probably is, but my character will come out in them. But I don't think about it like that. Well, I guess when I'm making a documentary, I'm trying to explore a subject with an open mind, and I'm not trying to impose on the audience what they should think about it. But of course, there's no such thing as objectivity in documentary. It's not objective. But I think in a fiction film, one is able to use cinema to its full glory. So you use sound design and color and cinematography and movement of the camera to express what you want to express, the emotion or the idea you want to express in something. So yeah, fiction filmmaking or making a story that's not a true story is, I think, has more artistic expression. But I think I started my career as a journalist, and I think there's a big part of me which is still just interested journalistically in finding out the truth and asking questions, exploring the difficult issues. I think I'm not usually scared. I'm usually the opposite of that. I kind of am quite turned on by the idea that something's going to be controversial or people are going to discuss it and argue about it. And I like that because it brings a life to the film outside of what I intended for it. People are going to have their own ideas and discuss their own ideas about it. So I really like that. But of course, when you make a documentary about real people who are still alive, you've got to bear in mind how this is going to impact them. And in the case of Galliano, I am worried sometimes about how this film is going to impact him and how people think about him, especially because I think I've been surprised by how judgmental some people are about him. Galliano has seen the film, yes. Galliano watched the film a couple of times when it was just first ready. And he really liked the film. But also there's something amazing about him in that once he had agreed, it took a long time for him to agree to do the film, but once he had agreed, he didn't ask me to change anything. He never said to me, oh, you can't talk about this subject, these questions are not allowed. Nothing like that. He was absolutely open with me. Nothing was out of limits. And so when he saw the film, he said to me, I'm not going to ask you to change anything because I wouldn't expect you to come to my studio and tell me how to change my dress, what color it should be, how long it should be. I think it's always the editing is the real challenge and also the fun of a documentary, because you might think you know what story you want to tell going into it, but if that story doesn't change as you start to shoot and as you start to edit, then it's not going to be a good documentary. There needs to be something that's alive and spontaneous about the process of making the film to make it really worthwhile making, I think. Otherwise, you might as well write an essay about the subject. There's no point in making a film. And the best things in the Galliano film are the bits that I didn't expect to happen. Obviously, it was particularly in this instance where a lot of people are a bit scared, a bit nervous about the subject. It was hard to persuade some people to talk, and that took a lot of time. And luckily, I had a very good producer I was working with who did a lot of the persuading of people. When he first did this, I thought, oh, he's lying to me. But then I realized he's not stupid. He can't be lying. And also his partner, Alexei, tells the truth from off camera. So it's not that he's lying. It's something more complicated. It's something to do with him having created a version of events in his own head to make it more palatable, more acceptable for him. You know, he's probably finds it difficult to live with himself, I think, at times. And so he's created a narrative in his head, but that narrative does not mean it happened 2 or 3 times. That's what I'm living for. I'm going, finally, something that I'm not expecting, and something that's alive in the moment. And there's a few moments like that in the film. There's a moment where Naomi Campbell sort of says, I haven't seen the video, I never want to see it. Which is exactly what her PR people probably said to her, don't say. But she said, and then there's a moment where, Charlize Theron talks about how her own father was an alcoholic and tried to kill her under the addiction that he had. And so those sort of moments you don't expect people to be so personal. And when they are, it takes the film to a new depth. And actually, maybe the most interesting one of those in the film is where one of the victims who we interviewed, victims of Galliano's abuse, appears on camera and he says, I appeared at court and I testified that Galliano is not a racist, but now I've changed my mind. I think he is. And I was like, really? What? That's so extreme. Why? Why have you changed your mind? And those moments also reflect the complexity of life, and that's what the film is trying to be, a film which opens you up to complexity instead of closing you down to just simple answers that are maybe convenient but aren't the whole truth. Well, all I was trying to convey was the uncertainty of the truth, that it's very, very hard to know what the truth is. And often when we pretend to ourselves that we really know what happened in the past, we're kidding ourselves. And it's impossible to say, for instance, did John look at the victim, Philippe, and apologize to him in court, which is what he says he did, or did he not? So you, the audience, are in my position. I'm putting you in my position. You have to make the judgment. Why should I make the judgment for you? Because I don't know. I don't know. And in a way, I think you can see the film almost like a court case, that you're presented with this evidence, you're presented with witnesses and with the testimony of the man who's the accused, who's John, and you have to make your own decision. Are you going to let him be forgiven and leave the courtroom a free man, or is he going to be sent to prison? Well, I think that one of the origins of John's fascination with design and with fantasy and escapism is in cinema. And as a child, he watched with his mother some of the only happy times I think he had as a child, watching old movies, classic movies of the 30s and the 40s with Marlene Dietrich and Joan Crawford and these great golden age stars. And even more recently, he did a whole collection based on Jane Campion's The Piano, for instance. So cinema is one of the big inspirations for him. But I think what I tried to get across in the documentary is that John is more interested in a great show than he is in just making clothes. The clothes are kind of secondary in a funny way. It's about making this great moment, this great show, which, like a movie, evokes tremendous emotions, which takes you on some kind of a narrative, even if that narrative is often very puzzling, but you feel you've been on a journey with it. And I think that's what makes him a really unique designer, actually, is that the items of clothing are imbued with the fantasy of the whole show, the whole journey. That's when you buy that dress, that's what you're buying. You're not just buying something on a hanger that's made out of cloth. Yeah, and I think that's why the models really loved him. There's a moment in the film where all the great models, all the supermodels show up for free to do a show for John when he's at his lowest point and everything's gone wrong for him, and they show up for him for free, and they bring their own shoes and their own hairdressers, and they're paying for everything. And the reason I think they did that is because he made them feel like artists. He made them feel like actresses, not just models. And I think when you're a model, particularly back then, I think it was very objectified. And you were just a mannequin. You were just something to be moved around. What they call, sometimes very rudely in the film business, you were a meat puppet, which is a great but terrible phrase for an actor. But John treated them as actresses who could evoke emotion, and they loved that, and that's why they loved John and respected John. Oh, there's so many films and so many different directors that have inspired me, but I think that the film that I reference the most and I look at the most to try and understand how it's made and how I can capture some of the same feelings that film evokes for me is The Battle of Algiers by Pontecorvo, which is a film made just after the independence of Algeria, where real people who were part of the independence struggle appear in this movie. And it's kind of a thriller, and it's full of emotion, but it's also a documentary reconstruction in some ways. It's all sorts of things in one movie. And I recently made a movie called The Mauritanian, which is about a Guantanamo inmate, and it has a sort of scenes of torture in it. And I looked at, again, like I often do, I looked back at this Battle of Algiers to see how, because there's torture as an element in that film as well. So yeah, I think that's my touchstone. Well, they're so different. If you take a film like Touching the Void and a film like the Galliano documentary, they're so vastly different. There's something beautiful about making a film that's all about archive, where you're searching for something that's just special and beautiful that you didn't have anything to do with creating. So sometimes you can love it more because it's not yours. You don't see the flaws in it. You just go, oh, what a wonderful gift. I can take that and I can see all these themes in that bit of archive, and it's wonderful. So that's there's a pleasure in just sort of taking the things that are given to you by the archives. But at the same time, sometimes there's a film like Touching the Void where it was a book, it was a memoir written by someone, and I had to figure out, how do I tell this as a documentary? There's no footage, there's no archive, so in what way can it be a documentary? So in the end, it becomes a film which is part the testimony of the real people, 3 people talking to you, but then all the visual components are kind of dramatized. But it still is a documentary. I think that film is an interesting combination of both documentary and drama. It can't exist in either space. I don't think there's a good, fully dramatized version of that, because you need to be inside the heads of the people. You couldn't do it as a traditional drama. It wouldn't be very interesting. And you can't do it as a complete documentary because there isn't any footage of it. So it's a crossbreed.